All right, welcome to lesson 22. We're going to talk about the perfect and pluperfect indicative middle passive and the perfect infinitive middle passive of omega verbs like paideo. So to do this, we're going to have to add in a fifth principal part. So here are the first five principal parts of paideo. Paideo, I teach. Paideoso, I shall teach. Epaideosa, I taught. Pepaideoka, I have taught. And now pepaideomai, I have taught for my own sake, middle, or I have been taught, passive. And here is the stem that we're going to be using. Now, the perfect indicative middle passive is a primary tense. It's talking about completed action in present time. So it's going to use the primary middle passive endings, which we've already seen with the present middle passive and the future middle. My, sai, tai, metha, stha, and tai. The pluperfect indicative middle passive is a secondary tense because it's talking about completed action in past time. So it's going to use the secondary middle passive endings that we've seen in the imperfect middle and passive and the aorist middle. Main, saw, ta, metha, stha, and ta. And we're going to attach these endings directly to that stem from the fifth principal part. So there's that stem. And we're going to get pepaideomai, pepaideusai, pepaideotai, pepaideumtha, pepaideustha, pepaideontai. Notice that these final I's, even though they're diphthongs, are counting as short for purposes of accentuation. Note that these all have recessive accent. Now the pluperfect indicative middle passive. Again, we've got that stem from the fifth principal part. We're augmenting it with the same rules that we use to augment the fourth principal part to make the pluperfect indicative active. And we're adding main, saw, ta, metha, stha, and ta directly to that stem. So let's take a look at what these mean. Pepaideusai, the second person singular, perfect indicative middle passive. You have taught for your own sake, or you have been taught, so it has perfective aspect. Epipaideusa, the second person singular of the pluperfect indicative middle passive. You had taught for your own sake, or you had been taught, also with perfective aspect. We also have a perfect infinitive middle passive. Again, that stem from the fifth principal part with thigh added right to it. It's always accented on the penult, and this final thigh counts as short for purposes of accentuation. So since this AU is long, that's why we have a circumflex there. All right, now let's compare the infinitives. Let's start with the present infinitive middle passive, paideosthai. It's going to have imperfective aspect, and we can translate it middle, to be teaching for one's own sake, or passive, to be being taught. Then the aorist infinitive middle is going to have aoristic aspect, paideusasthai, to teach for one's own sake. Finally, the perfect infinitive middle passive, pepaideusthai, it's going to have perfective aspect, middle, to have taught for one's own sake, passive, to have been taught. So let's take a look at some fifth principal parts. So pepaideumai, pepoiemai, edzdetemai, all of those before that mai have some kind of vowel. And so it's easy to attach the mai, sai, tai, and main, saw, ta endings after a vowel. But if we look at some of these others, and I've grouped them by color, sometimes before the mai, you're going to see a lambda. We're going to call that a liquid stem. Sometimes before the my, you're going to see another mu, and those are actually labial stems. Sometimes before the my, you're going to see a gamma, and those are palatal or velar stems. And sometimes before the my, you're going to see a sigma. Those are dental stems. So let's look at those each individually. First, what if we have a fifth principal part ending in a liquid? Engelmai from Angelo. Well, before any ending that begins with a mu, my, metha, main, metha again, we're going to see that lambda. Okay? Before any ending that begins with a T, we're also going to see the lambda. Before the psi ending, we see the lambda. Before the sa ending, we see the lambda. But before the sthes, the sigma drops out. So we just have engelthe. Okay? And the perfect middle passive infinitive, you're going to have whatever happens here in the second person plural is always going to happen in the infinitives too. So the perfect middle passive infinitive is engelthai. Now let's take a look at a fifth principal part ending in a labial. Klepto gives us for the fifth principal part keklemai. So the fifth principal part, we see another mu before this my ending. And so wherever you have a mu, you're going to have this double mu. So my, metha, main, metha. But before the T's of tai and ta, you're actually going to see the labial tai, ta. Before the psi and sa endings, the labial plus the sigma combine to give you a psi, psi, psa. And before the the endings, the sigma's dropping out, and then the labial roughens to match the theta, so you get the. And whatever happens here is going to happen in the infinitive too, keklephai. Okay, so now let's take a look at what happens if you have a fifth principal part that ends in a palatal. You're going to have a gamma there before the my. And you're going to have a gamma wherever the ending begins with a mu. So gmai, gmetha, gmein. Gmetha again. Okay. Before the tau of tai and ta, okay, you're going to get a kappa. And before the psi and sa, the palatal plus the sigma are going to combine to give you a xi. And before the ste ending, the sigma drops out, the palatal roughens to a ki, and you get kthe. Same happens in the infinitive peprachthai. All right, finally, let's talk about what happens if the fifth principal part, the stem, ends in a dental. You're going to see a sigma there before the my, the fifth principal part. And you're going to see sigma before all the endings that begin with a mu. So smy, smetha, smain, smetha again. You're also going to see the sigma before the endings that begin with a tau. So sty and sta. Now before the endings that begin with a sigma, one of the sigma is going to drop out. So psi, ste, saw, ste. And whatever happens in the second person plural happens in the middle passive infinitive too. So pepes thigh. Now, something we haven't talked about, but all of these fifth principal parts whose stems end in a consonant, whether it's a labial or a dental or a palatal or a liquid, we've left this part blank. And that's because with these consonant stems, it's just impossible to use an enti or enta ending for the perfect or pluperfect. And so we just don't even try. We're going to learn a roundabout way of doing this using a participle plus a form of the verb to be. But until we learn participles, this space is just going to be left blank. Okay, let's look at one final complication with the perfect and pluperfect passive. Let's look at this example, which has an imperfect passive. Hoi hippoi hupa ton koron epilunto. So the horses were being loved by the girls. So that's a genitive of personal agent with this imperfect passive. Or let's look at this example. Ta tekna hupa ton leonton edioketa. So ta tekna, the children, neuter plural, so it has a singular verb. The children were being chased by the lions. Well, now let's take this first sentence and put it into the perfect passive. Hoi hippoi tais cordais pethilain tai. The horses have been loved by the girls. Now we don't use a genitive of personal agent, we use a dative of personal agent. Let's look at this example with a pluperfect. Ta tekna tois lausi edediocta. The children had been chased by the lions. Again, dative of personal agent. So we use a dative of personal agent rather than a genitive of personal agent, just with the perfect and pluperfect passive. And that's it.